Hey guys, Adam Jolly here in Swansea, Illinois, bringing you the Spaced Repetition System Web Application. And the first thing to go over is probably what a spaced repetition system is. It's basically smart flashcards that when you're studying them, they don't show up again until after a certain interval. So if you've studied it for the first day, it'll show up tomorrow, and then after it shows up again, maybe 3 days, 5 days. And it kind of depends on how well you get the card. I'll go more into detail later, but that is basically the premise of this system. The purpose of me creating this was so that people who are either self learning or if they need supplemental material in their classes, they can use this to help study. And so the first thing you see here is the login screen. It's the first thing that pops up. Behind everything is, of course, a database. And there are three main tables here: cards, decks, and users. So if you go here on the users, you see who all the users are. And we're just going to make a quick new user on the register page just so we can see exactly what happens. And whenever you register it, you see eAEC. Whenever you refresh this, it'll show up at the bottom with the encrypted password so no one can see what that is. But we're going to go ahead and log under a user that was already created just so we can actually see some of the studying and work here later. First thing I want to go over though is the card creation, because that is the star of the show. The flashcards are primarily what drives this project, of course. So if we go to the very bottom here, we're going to go ahead and create a card. And then we'll see how it shows up. And I'll explain a little bit more what's going on in a second. We're going to go ahead and put it in test 2, which we are later going to study from. So eAEC rocks go MCK. Sure, reasonable card. It's probably a little too easy because it's obvious, but if we refresh this and scroll down to the bottom, then we will see eAEC. It's really hard to say for some reason. Rocks go MCK. So the front of the card is, of course, what you see whenever the card gets pulled up. And then the back and the notes, they actually show up at the same time. So what shows up on the back will be the answer. And the notes is there just to make it a little easier for you to understand. So if it were a formula for chemistry or something, you could put notes like a mnemonic device on how you remember it, something like that. Or algebra, everyone hears the order of operations. The one I used in high school was, "Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally." But all right, now that we've created a card, we can go to our decks, and it shows default, test, and test 2. Those are just the decks that I made in general. If we go over to the decks page, you can see all the ones here. And again, we're going to create a deck first just so you see that pop up. eAEC. There we go. I almost messed it up again. But anyway, we created the deck. Again, we refresh it here, and it shows up at the bottom. And you can actually tell which user made the deck by looking at this column here. This 9 represents which user made it, which we signed in under Adam. We don't know his password because it's encrypted. But if you look here, Adam is the 9th user. Okay, so if we go back to the cards, we can actually see which deck it's under. We're going to be studying test 2, which is deck 9. And if you go all the way over here to the left, you can see it's user 9, deck 9, which is Adam test 2. But the more interesting thing is that there are a lot of a lot of cards in test 2, which we can view all at once by going to test 2. And you also saw the deck pop up here. It wasn't here before. But we can view a deck and see all of the cards in the deck, the front, the back, and the notes, which we're about to study. Viewing the deck right before studying might be cheating a bit, but we're going to do it here today. So we're going to study deck test 2. And we should all know the answer to this one. It rocks, right? And go MCK. That's how I can remember that, right? So whenever you hit the show answer, it shows the back and the notes, as I said earlier. And then here, these buttons at the bottom, you're grading yourself. Now, you want to be as honest as possible because it wants to know how often it needs to show you the card again. So it actually keeps track of whether it's your first time seeing the card. This card, it is the first time. We just made it today after all, so we would have never seen this card before. And so if we want to see it again in 10 minutes, it won't affect stuff like the interval itself, how easy the card was for us, anything like that. And we see here the due date is today at the time we made it, which was about 4 minutes ago. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, let's see that again in 10 minutes. I want to make sure I've got it down. It's one of those that probably should be pretty easy. But if I refresh the page, we can see that the due actually moves up to 10 minutes from the time you see here at the bottom of my screen. And that's the entire premise behind these spaced repetition flashcards, is they all have a due date that they'll pop up. I have one that's not actually due until tomorrow, just happened whenever I was testing functionality and everything. But the biggest winner of this entire project is probably this highlighted part right here. That is the algorithm that I'm using to get the due date. Super Memo actually came up with this based off of what is called the forgetting curve. Some smart guy in the late 1800s came up with the forgetting curve, and basically you'll forget it until you see it again, and then as you see it over and over again, that curve goes down more slowly. The example I like giving people is if you were to hear your name, or I should say, if you've never heard your name ever again for the rest of your life, you would eventually forget it. However, in order to forget it, you'd probably have to hear it not hear it for about 3,000 years. I don't know if the math's true on that because everyone hears their name a different amount of times, but you get the point. You're never going to forget your name because you will always hear it. So that's a pretty nice example, in my opinion. So if we go to this one and hit great, it'll affect some of the stuff there. So if we refresh and go to that card, then we should see it's no longer the first time we saw that card. So now the interval and the easiness of the card should be affected the next time we see it. So, essentially, that is the studying part of the project. And again, this could be used for anything from helping you study for your classes, and it doesn't punish you like getting a grade would for getting stuff wrong. So it's a really good place for you to put your stuff and constantly be exposed to it without having to worry about whether you get it right or wrong. And so self-learners could use this a lot too, because you can make your own flashcards, and that way you can expose yourself to whatever material you want. It's a really good supplemental studying tool. I don't think it should ever be used as the primary one, just because unless it's strictly theory, it's hard to get stuff done in practice with it. For example, learning a language, you have to actually read and speak it. Uh, you can try all you want to learn how to swim. You might want to get into a pool. So that is basically my spaced repetition application project. It's what I've been working on all year, and I hope you guys liked it.